What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic DFS channel. And today we're talking College Football DFS, the Week 4 main slate, 14 games. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you by Prize Picks. They have a first match deposit bonus up to $100. We have player projections over at Stochastic, which you can use to take advantage of these lines. I do a video every single Friday, but it's not just college football. They've got NFL, they've got NBA coming up, MLB, and all sorts of niche sports, which you can take advantage of. And better yet, with that first match deposit bonus, they're also giving you one free month of Odd Shopper, which you can use across sports books and across sports. Phenomenal deal, so make sure to check them out. Link in the video description below. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 21 or older to play. All right. No weddings this weekend, so we're locked in. It is one of the best slates I can remember, and we've got 14 games of just premier matchups, as well as some nice slates. So we'll dive right behind the glass right away here. This is the data usage tool we have over at Stochastic. It's available along with projections, ownership projections, everything you know and love and what you need to dominate DFS. The link for that is in the video description below. If you'd like to take advantage, we've talked a lot about this sheet at this point. So if you have questions on it, reach out to me on Twitter or leave a comment. We can go over this. But up at the top, you've got game environment metrics. And then below, you have player statistics, player data, which you can use to hopefully dive a little deeper, find some players that people don't already know about. We start with Rutgers in Michigan. Not the most exciting game, but Michigan should be tested a little more than they have at any other point this year. 24-point spread, 43.5 total. Rutgers comes in below 10 points implied. You're not going to play anybody on Rutgers more than likely. Both these teams are bottom 8 in pace. They're also both run-heavy teams. Gavin Wimsatt's been awesome, and I actually kind of like Rutgers against the spread. They've got an awesome defense. Just overmatched here. And anytime you have a team implied below 10 points, you need some sort of just really condensed opportunity, which Rutgers doesn't have. Kyle Monangai leads the backfield, but you also see Samuel Brown and Jayshon Benjamin play a little bit here. Receiver, Christian Dremel, Isaiah Washington, and Jaquay Jackson are your top 3. They're rotating tight end a little more than they thought they were going to do at the beginning of the year. Only real question here is Chris Long hasn't played in 2 games. If he's back, I think that even muddles receiver further, which means we probably don't anybody. The only thing here worth mentioning is Jaquay Jackson is the stone minimum. A lot of you guys ask, who do we play if we find a lineup we love, but we need someone at the min price? I think Jaquay Jackson is live if Chris Long misses. In the first game, Jaquay Jackson's route rate was below 30%. It's really taken the Chris Long injury for him to jump up. Michigan, a lot more interesting here. J.J. McCarthy has a ceiling. We just haven't seen a team push Michigan enough to coax that out of him. Rutgers might be able to do that. McCarthy is very mobile. He's only rushed 4 times designed to begin the year. He'll do that more when games are competitive. So you do have a rushing floor with McCarthy. You just need the opponent to be competent enough to see it. And Rutgers, I think, is right on that borderline where maybe they give it to him. He's efficient as a passer. He's an 8.8 career yards per attempt. The strength of Rutgers' defense, this game is really slow. So I question the ceiling with McCarthy. I don't think he's likely to give you a 300-yard bonus or something. And at this price, that just means I'd rather play other guys on this elite slate. Kind of goes with receiver here too. With McCarthy capped as a ceiling play, I think the receivers are capped here too. Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, and Colston Loveland are the guys you would play. But I don't think anyone is going to have a condensed enough opportunity for an offense that might not get pushed in a game that has a really low total, really slow here. These would just be one-offs, random plays for me. Where we do want to focus our attentions to the backfield. I don't think either Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards are particularly expensive. I view them as being pretty efficiently priced here. Edwards has struggled a lot to start the year. I don't think that continues. We have a pretty good sample on Edwards. Corum's had a really solid year on just 42 touches, so it's not like you're going to see a bell cow workload for Corum, but we know the story. He's going to get there with efficiency a lot of the time, so I don't think these are players you rule out of your player pool, kind of like Penn State or Ohio State. When you get them, you get them, and if you have a strong feel on them, I have no issues playing them, but they're not guys I'm taking stands on. Game number 2, far more interesting. Florida State takes on Clemson. We have Florida State is a 1.5-point road favorite. Total in the game is 55.5. Florida State just tested by Boston College. They took their foot off the gas in what was kind of an ugly game for them, but very vanilla game plan in the second half. Florida State has a league average pass rate, 47%. They're not particularly fast, but I think you see that pace increase in more competitive spots, which we have here. Jordan Travis is awesome. You're going to see him used more on designed runs. In their 2 competitive games, he has at least 5 designed rush attempts in both of those. The guy's averaging 246 as a passer, and his opportunities haven't been there yet. I expect the opportunities to rise, and with that comes the ceiling. So 9,400, no issues playing Travis. And one thing I'll say up front, done a lot of building already. This slate is not particularly tough in terms of pricing. So 9,400, I don't see there being a lot of prohibitiveness to playing a guy like Travis. I'll definitely be getting to some of him. The backfield is a little more wide than I thought it was going to be. Rodney Hill's played some. And while he's pretty distant as the number 3, Toafili is going to be the pass catcher, and Trey Benson's typically getting your early downs. Rodney Hill's playing enough where it kind of just hurts Toafili and Benson and makes them less attractive price-adjusted plays. So I don't see myself getting a ton, especially against what is a stiff Clemson defense overall. I think we can find better price-adjusted plays than these guys, just GPP plays if you're getting there. Where I will say we have pretty good prices is at receiver. I have a ton of interest in the top 3 here between Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman, and tight end Jaheim Bell, who's getting that unique usage where he'll get a carry from here or there in the run game, which is awesome for Jaheim Bell. They're locked in as the top 3 receivers, and you're not really seeing any variations between those 3. Where they do differ a little bit is their wide receiver 3. Typically, that's been Destin Hill. His route rate jumped above 50% most recently. I think he's moved ahead of Winston Wright and the other guys they've been rotating in. The only thing I'll say about that, Florida State's used a fair amount of 12 personnel. You see them put guys like Kyle Morlock on the field a decent amount, and I don't know if that's going to change. You're just going to see variable personnel from Florida State, which suits their talent, but it hurts the wide receiver 3 position. All that said, I have no issues going up to Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman. They're locked into their target shares. Right now, you've got Johnny Wilson at 25%, Keon Coleman at 23.5%. I think this rises in more competitive games, similar to week 1, where you had Johnny Wilson at 9, Keon Coleman at 11. Keon Coleman didn't even catch a pass last week, which speaks to the vanilla approach Florida State took against Clemson. On the other side, Clemson is interesting to me. I will be playing some Cade Klubnik at 7,300, largely because he had 8 designed rush attempts against Duke. That number is plummeted, but Clemson hasn't really been pushed all that much in their last 2 games. So the 8 designed attempts is enough to give Cade Klubnik a pretty good floor if he sees that same workload. And Clemson passing about 51.5% of the time. They were passing a ton against Duke, got down in that game early, but still, you played 2 cupcakes, and Clemson didn't really take their foot off the gas with the pass. They were working out some things, and I think Cade Klubnik is fine to play. I think you can play him naked. We'll skip over running back for a second and talk about receivers. Part of the reason I would rather play him naked is just this logjam at receiver. I'll give you the routes broken down recently because it's not what I expected, to just put it that way. Antonio Williams has kind of seen his role drop. And I don't know if there's an injury here, 20% of the routes last week. I kind of think they're just evaluating guys. But even against Duke, 64% of the routes for Williams, it's lower than I thought. Bo Collins has been the locked-in wide receiver 1. He was at 94% of the routes in that Duke game. So if you're going to one guy, I think Bo Collins is your preferred stacking option. He's not expensive at 4,900. You can play Bo Collins. This is more of a contrarian stack to begin with. I'll preface with that. I'm not like locking in the Clemson guys, but I think you can play them. Secondary is pretty tough for Florida State. Aside from that, they're rotating guys on and off the field. I do think Cole Turner being out for the year is going to consolidate some opportunity for Williams. So if you want to go back there, don't hate it. And then I think you probably see Adam Randall play more. But with that said, you're still seeing guys like Tyler Brown, Brandon Spector. I mean, they rotate guys in a lot here. Tight end Jake Brenningstool is interesting at 4,400. Only 11 targets this year. Not very efficient, but he's playing like the 3rd most among all pass catchers. I wish he was a little bit cheaper, so I don't have a ton of interest here, but at least a name to mention. Where Florida State has been particularly giving is on the ground. I will say a lot of that came against quarterbacks. So they got gashed by Jaden Daniels and Tom Castellanos. They actually defended running backs pretty well, which is another reason to maybe take a look at Klubnik. But Will Shipley, Phil Maffa, they're forming that 1-2 punch. It's about a 65-35 split in favor of Shipley. As a contrarian play, I'm always going to use Shipley. 5,700 is not expensive enough. He also has a very good role in the pass game, a 51% route rate on the year that spikes in competitive games. We'll be using Shipley in GPPs, and that's kind of how I view Clemson in general. Pretty good GPP team, and I don't hate game stacks here with the 55.5 total. It's not the best total on the board, which maybe makes it a little contrarian. Game 3, we have Oklahoma, Cincinnati, a total on the rise. It is currently 57. The spread is 14. This has moved. Cincinnati's taken some money after losing to a MAC school. Anyway, Oklahoma has not really been tested, played a semi-close game against SMU. 14-point favorites here. Dylan Gabriel at 9,100. Still no issues. I honestly think he's underpriced at this mark. He's averaging over 300 yards per game. Oklahoma still playing fast. They vary their pass rate a lot depending on game script. So when pushed, they're going to pass a lot. Under Levy, when not pushed, they take their foot off the gas. Gabriel has been mobile, way more mobile than we saw with UCF. He has 7 designed attempts this year. He's only taken 1 sack. This offensive line has held up. Now, they will be tested here. Cincinnati has a ferocious defensive line, by far the best unit on that defense. So we'll see if that holds up here. But Gabriel, more than viable in stacks. I love the prices on his receivers. This is pretty shocking to me. Andrel Anthony is not being priced as the wide receiver 1. He already has 254 yards, just elite big playmaking ability, leads the team in targets. He's ahead of Drake Stoops and Jaleel Farouk. Now, with that said, Stoops did miss a portion of the game, their first game. So at least worth mentioning here, but I think Andrel Anthony is severely underpriced. I love the Dylan Gabriel to Andrel Anthony stacks. And that's no slight to Jaleel Farouk. He was up at 90% of the routes against SMU. Drake Stoops was at 75%. And again, he's been banged up, so I would anticipate Stoops being more involved. Want to play all these top 3 guys. Jaquez Petaway, you see the 11 targets on the year, most of that in week 1. Maybe some people will be baited into playing him. Only 11% of the routes last week. I don't want any part of that. At tight end, kind of a rotation here. Stogner not playing quite as much as I thought, but even in the last 2 games, 84% of the routes, 69%. Stogner's still pretty good as a complete punt option with this team. He only has 2 targets, so you're buying extremely low. I don't think that persists. I would anticipate Stogner's targets rising quite a bit with the route rate he has shown, especially in the last 2 games. Running back is a complete mess. Again, we mentioned the matchup is poor. Cincinnati very good on the defensive line. And I just don't know what they're doing on a week-to-week basis. 1 week, you have Javonte Barnes leading. Next week, Tawi Walker leads. Then the last week, Tawi Walker and Marcus Major barely played. Javonte Barnes led running backs with 13 carries, and then Gavin Sawchuk popped up for 9. Sawchuk dealt with an injury early in the year, so maybe this was their intention all along. But I could see any of these 4 running backs leading the team in carries. If you force me to rank them, I would say Barnes is most likely to lead, Sawchuk 2nd, Marcus Major 3rd, Tawi Walker 4th. I do not have any confidence in this, and I think there's a decent chance all 4 play. On to the Cincinnati side, we have the former Satterfield offense from Louisville moving over here. So Emory Jones is a pretty good fit in the offense. Expect a lot of designed runs. Emory Jones has 8 and 13 designed runs over the last 2 games. He hasn't been the most efficient on the ground, only 144 yards. Part of that because he'll take sacks, already has 7 of those. But man, really good rushing floor with Emory. And if you view this game as, a game stacking shootout kind of situation, Emory Jones should be in your player pool. He's not going to pop up for cash or anything like that. The backfield, I think when games are tough, like last week, Ryan Montgomery popped up, but Corey Kiner's still really involved. I think Corey Kiner's their preferred early down back. And then Ryan Montgomery and Miles Montgomery are more change of paces. More so Ryan than Miles. Miles was kind of phased out last game. But 20 carries for Ryan in a game they lost to Miami, Ohio. I don't know, 4,300, somewhat intriguing to me. I would rather play Kiner, but this situation is also pretty dicey. Receiver is actually not that difficult for Cincinnati, which I thought it might be. Louisville had a tendency to rotate guys, but for Cincinnati this year, it's kind of just been Xavier Henderson, Braden Smith, and D. Wiggins. Not much volatility there. All of them have route rates above 73%. Targets are pretty condensed. Pass game, I worry about efficiency, but man, you could go to D. Wiggins and Braden Smith for cheap stacks here, no problem. Tight end is a split. I'm not going to play the tight ends here. And yeah, that about does it for this team. I think it's another interesting contrarian game stacking sort of situation. Auburn A&M, 8-point spread in favor of A&M, 51 total, not quite as intriguing to me. Both these offenses do play fast, so maybe we could get some total movement here towards the over. I don't know. Auburn's using a platoon at quarterback. It's mostly Peyton Thorne, about 80%, and then 20% Robbie Ashford. Ashford's coming in mainly for designed runs, but I don't think this is going away. He has 15 designed runs through 3 games. Thorne's actually been efficient. The problem is just that him coming off the field for snaps at 8K is an issue. So I'm not playing Auburn's QBs. Jarquez Hunter is interesting to me. He's been in a timeshare with Damari Alston, but I'm like wondering at some point, do they unlock him? You know, he missed week 1. I don't know. It's thin, but Hunter has shown elite efficiency at times. He's had kind of a bad start to the year, had the off-field issues. I don't know. It's difficult to say whether he'll carve out this bell cow role that we thought he might have. Just doesn't have it at this point. I'm going to stay away for now with the price. 6,900 is not enough for me to take shots on this just yet, especially as an 8-point dog, but perhaps in the future. The receiving game for Auburn has been a mess, and it's not that bad, actually. I actually kind of like their receivers, but they're rotating a ton. I don't know here. So basically, among these guys at the top, Shane Hooks is kind of presumed to be their number one. His route rate has been 57% and 56% in their close games. He only has 11 targets. That's really as high as it gets. Like Rivaldo Fairweather, 60% route rate over the last 2 games. Jay Fair, he came up at 63% last game, but then you've got like Omari Kelly, 41%. Jair Shorter, 22. Jeremiah Cobb, he's running back, 22. Coy Moore, 22. Tyler Fromm, a tight end, 19. The point I'm making is you have a lot of guys rotating on and off the field for this Auburn team. And their target leader, Jay Fair, has 20 targets on the year. Pretty dicey. Auburn's a team I'm probably going to stay away from. A&M has a 29.5 team total. We'll see about Wegman. He isn't exactly super involved in the run game. He only has 2 designed attempts on the year, so he is dependent on that pass game, which is good. He's averaging over 300 yards per game here, 36 attempts. A&M has a 59% pass rate. They got clobbered by Miami, but they've handled their other 2 opponents, so it's nice to see them really pursuing the pass. Wegman stacks, I think, will be contrarian, but not out of play. For the pass catchers, stacks are pretty easy here. You've got Evan Stewart and Noah Thomas as the top 2. Noah Thomas and Evan Stewart missed the last game. I expect them both back here. Evan Stewart had 27 targets through the first 2 games. He's severely underpriced. Best price-adjusted play in this game. You can play him by himself. No issues there. Aeneas Smith is interesting to me. I've been playing him a lot to start the year. His route rate is rising coming off the injury. 70% last game. My question is how much of that had to do with Stewart and Thomas being off the field? But you look back to the game prior, he was still pretty involved. So I think you could play some Smith as a bit of a contrarian option. And then last thing here with the tight ends, Jake Johnson has an 86 and 73% route rate over the last 2 games. 5 and 7 targets. He's 3,300. You could do a lot worse than Jake Johnson as a punt. Running back here, Amari Daniels, Le'Veon Moss, and Ruben Owens form a 3-way committee. We saw Le'Veon miss their game against Miami, but he came right back and boom, 3-way committee. It's split right down the middle. Won't be playing these guys. A game we do not have to spend a lot of time on is Virginia Tech Marshall. This is a game with a 4.5-point spread in favor of Marshall. Virginia Tech's taken a lot of money. The total is 41.5. That's really why we're not targeting it much. One-off game. Kyron Drones is the most interesting quarterback in the game for me. He needs to be labeled a starter. Grant Wells is pushing to play, but I don't think he does. Drones had 15 designed rush attempts. So those of you playing cash, I think he's in the conversation if he starts. That's just an amazing rushing floor for Drones. He doesn't have to do a ton through the air if that's the case. I think there's another guy we can talk about a little later I'd rather play, but Drones isn't a guy you're Xing out. Everybody else probably is. With drones on the field, this team really depressed their pass rate. So you're seeing 51.5% up at the top of the screen. That was way down last game, a game they lost, but a game they had to change their offense to suit their personnel. Backfield is about a 65-35 split. Bashal, Tootin, and Malachi Thomas, no interest there. Receivers a mess. You lost Allie Jennings. He's got a bad ankle injury. He's not going to play. Jalen Lane's expected to return, kind of muddling things here again. We did have Daquan Felton as the locked-in wide receiver 1. I don't think that's going to be the case if we get Lane back. So it's dicey here. And plus, I don't anticipate their pass rate being high. So there isn't a ton of interest in the pass game in general for me. Not a situation I anticipate getting much of at all. And I think if you get Lane back, that probably takes like a value Dwayne Lofton off the table here too at 3,400. Would rather play a value play we already mentioned. Marshall's only played 2 games. They were both cupcakes. I think this is a bit expensive for Cam Fancher. He's not a good passer. He does run a fair amount. He has 15 designed attempts through those 2 games. So he's in the same bucket as Drones. Good rushing floor, but what's the ceiling, especially in this game environment? Boston College, I think, has a quarterback in the same situation I'd rather play than these two, but not going to X them out. We'll see how much I get. I anticipate very little. Rasheen Ali is a monster. He's the engine of the offense, and he's only 6K. You can play Rasheen Ali for sure, even against a pretty decent Virginia Tech defense. They've been exposed at times, but it's the best defense Marshall's faced. We can say that, even though I don't think Virginia Tech's defense is awesome. Ali has 18 carries in back-to-back games. He has a 74% route rate. If Virginia Tech gets up in this game, which they are not projected to, Marshall's the favorite. Even if Virginia Tech does get up, Ali is involved in the pass game. He's an awesome play. Receiver, this is a complete mess. Rasheen Ali has the highest route rate on the team outside of tight end Cade Conley. If you're playing anyone, it is Cade Conley at 3,700. He has 10 targets, 89% route rate. Nobody else at the receiver or tight end position even has a 60% route rate. We'll keep this easy enough and move to our next game. This one, stackable for sure. SMU, TCU. The spread has moved to 7 in favor of TCU. The total is 62.5. It's actually come down, but TCU's 4th in pace. SMU is 46th. Both these teams within very close to league average in pass rate. SMU is actually at 53%. TCU at 48%. Let's start with the SMU side. Preston Stone at 7,400 is a crazy value on this slate. He's not getting a lot of the rushing that Mordecai did, but he has decent rushing chops. Like, he's not going to give you zeros in that regard. 35 pass attempts per game. Decent efficiency here. Preston Stone's too cheap. I like playing him in stacks. Probably not cash. I'd probably play some combination of Castellanos and like a stud, but tournaments, I've loved Preston Stone. Receiving game, they've had guys in and out of the lineup, so I'm going to give you their routes from recent games, or I guess recent competitive games, because it is a rotation. Even tight ends a rotation. RJ Maryland hasn't eclipsed 63% of the routes in any game this year. The leading receiver in terms of routes, I'm going to look at that Oklahoma game in particular. You had Jordan Curley at 58%, Jake Bailey at 56%, Romello Brinson at 52%, Moochie Dixon at 48%, Keyshawn Smith at 33%. I mean, it's pretty gross. If I had to pick one, just looking price adjusted, I'm going to side with RJ Maryland at 3,400 as the tight end. He did play last week, so don't worry about this blank square. He was on the field, which is a cupcake game. But, I mean, you're basically getting the same routes and targets as a Jake Bailey, but you're getting them 2K cheaper. So Maryland's my preferred stacking option. Any one of these guys could pop off. I would look for the guys with the most routes. To highlight your top 3 projected routes outside of Maryland are going to be Jake Bailey, Romello Brinson, Jordan Curley, followed closely by Moochie Dixon 4th. The backfield, I mean, they're suspending guys left and right. I don't know what it is. Apparently, these guys aren't going to class, but last game you had Jalen Knighton out, and like LJ Johnson got hurt in the game. Velton Gardner was suspended. I mean, this is very volatile. The most likely to lead the backfield in carries is Jalen Knighton, and again, his absence was suspension related. In the first 2 games, he was handling 19.5 touches per game. I'm going to assume Jalen Knighton is the lead back here, followed by LJ Johnson, followed by Kamar Wheaton in that order, followed by Tyler Levine, if you're wondering. But I mean, Kamar Wheaton's been suspended for games. Like, watch SMU pregame. If guys don't go to class, there is no mercy. They're getting suspended. Watch and see. SMU's been very, very risky to begin the year. And also, LJ Johnson being out, that would help Kamar Wheaton. That would help Knighton, and they would become much better plays. TCU has a guy who is live for cash at quarterback in Chandler Morris. He has 8 design rush attempts. He will be used more in the run game when games are competitive. 12 scrambles. So he's not afraid to take off if the situation presents itself. 36 pass attempts per game through 3 games, averaging 286 yards per game. Much better passing efficiency from Morris than I expected. You're getting a good floor-ceiling combo in this game environment behind a nearly 35-point implied team total. Morris is going to be up there among the best price-adjusted plays on DraftKings. His stacking options have been volatile, largely due to injury, but I think we can parse this a little bit. I think your top 3 receivers here are going to be some combination of Savion Williams, Jalen Robinson, and J.P. Richardson, if you made me pick. Savion's been injured, but he's had a pretty good route rate when healthy. Robinson has gone from 52% of the routes to 67% to 89% last game, and that was with a lot of guys returning from injury. So I think Robinson's pretty locked into a role. And then J.P. Richardson last week, he was 4th on the team in routes among receivers at 48%, kind of a distant 3rd, but he's the guy I would rank 3rd. After that, I think we're going Warren Thompson, and then I would go down to Jack Beck, followed by JoJo Earl. The one wrench that could be thrown in this is Dylan Wright. Hasn't played in the last 2 games, 50% of the routes in week 1. I don't think he jumps any of the top 3, but I wouldn't be surprised if he jumps like a Warren Thompson or a Jack Beck or a JoJo Earl. So worst case scenario, they'll use 7 receivers. Best case, they'll use 6. Tight end Jared Wiley, he has seen his route rate drop with these receivers getting healthy. 72% of the routes to 49 to 36. It's at the point where I'm not going to play Wiley. But I hope that sums it up. Again, top 3 for me, and this is not price adjusted. I would say Savion, Jalen Robinson, J.P. Richardson. The best price-adjusted play is Jalen Robinson. The backfield, it is about a 70-30 split in favor of Imani Bailey. He's averaging 20 touches per game, nearly 120 rushing yards. Very good pass game role for Imani Bailey, too. His route rate is near 50%. Game script, independent. You can use him at his price. He's a very good price. Even Trey Sanders, he's a situational change of pace. He's averaging 9.7 touches per game. Sanders is a decent play at his price. Just Imani Bailey's cheap enough where I would find the salary if you can get there. Overall, TCU underpriced, a team I really like. Next game, Ole Miss and Bama. Another sneaky potential game stack, 56 total, 6.5 point spread currently, bouncing between 6.5 and 7. Bama's the favorite here. Ole Miss has just been decimating teams. Bury, Georgia Tech. Jackson Dart is playing the best football of his career. He's extremely involved as a rusher. He has 20 designed attempts over the last 2 games, then 5 more scrambles, only 5 sacks. Dart has elite upside. This Ole Miss team is still playing really fast. They're 13th in pace. So if they get pushed into a situation where Dart needs to throw more, I think it gives you a ceiling that way too. Very, very safe floor ceiling combo with Dart. Easy to stack too. Only thing that's a problem for them in DFS, real life, this is a benefit. You might be getting back some injured players. I put them way down at the bottom. Zachary Franklin, Caden Prescorn have not played yet. Both of them are practicing and project to return for this game. Caden Prescorn should form a timeshare with Michael Trigg at tight end. And Zachary Franklin, I think, immediately joins in this rotation. Trey Harris is also back practicing. He's 7K. Don't be afraid of the route rate. He just got injured immediately in week 2. Trey Harris, I think you could debate who's wide receiver 1 between Zachary Franklin and Trey Harris when they're both healthy. I do think Jordan Watkins is the 3. He's been the healthiest, so you've got the route rate and targets for Watkins. I think he's a bit expensive with those guys back in the fold. And then I would anticipate Dayton Wade moving to the wide receiver 4. Aiden Williams, I think, goes to the 5, and Jalen Knox the 6. Somewhat difficult to parse. Most of my interest is actually in the tight ends. They're very cheap, Trigg and Prescorn, but I think you can stack the receivers too. You force me to rank them. Franklin, I don't know how many routes he gets, so I would say Trey Harris 1, Watkins 2. The best play here is probably Quinshon Judkins. And we don't talk a lot of FanDuel, but let me just say 7,300 on FanDuel. Like, what in the world are we doing? Judkins is currently averaging 17 touches per game. He's been banged up. They did not use him a lot last week. We didn't even think he was going to play, but he played, and they did not use him a ton in anticipation of this Bama game. He's probably going to see 24 touches in this game. Very involved in the pass game. His route rate is 57%, which doesn't even factor in the injuries. He's a great price-adjusted play on DraftKings at 77, but holy FanDuel, 7,300. He should be the first guy in your lineup on FanDuel. Bama, Jalen Milroe is back. This, I think, is good for DFS and the offense. He was listed kind of as the backup. He's the cheapest of the Alabama signal callers, but the one question I have about Bama, like, he only had 3 designed rush attempts against Texas. I know they were trailing, but like, Tommy Rees, what are you doing? So my first thought is, Milroe has an awesome rushing floor. Does he? I don't know. Why are they not running him more design? Because he's only averaging, he has 92 rush yards in the year. That's in 2 games. I don't know here. This is fishy to me. I want to say I want to play Milroe, but I mean, the passing's not going to be great with Milroe. We know this. I don't know. They need to run him more if he's going to be viable at 8,300. He's a GPP play for that reason, because we know he has the mobility. We just need the Bama offense to unlock it. Running back, I think we're finally seeing Bama make some tough evaluations. I don't know what the disconnect between Saban and Tommy Rees is, but Jase McClellan's been horrific to start the year, and they finally moved towards Roydell Williams. It's still basically a 50-50 split, but Roydell outcarried him 16-13. This is what should happen. Jase McClellan is awful. So I think I would rather throw darts on Roydell in an ascending role versus McClellan, who did see a season high in carries, but man, he's just been awful. Receiver with Milroe, I think you see less pass attempts. They're also rotating a lot of guys here. Jermaine Burton, also, this is his second year, just horrible efficiency. They continue to put him on the field, but Bond has been more efficient than Jermaine Burton. He's not playing as much, which is a problem. And then the guy who's playing the third most is tight end Amari Niblack. He's straight up the first price-adjusted guy I want to go to, even though he only has 6 targets this year. You're going to get a ton of volatility for Bama. I honestly would prefer to run Milroe naked than stack him with one of these dicey receivers. In addition to the 3 I mentioned, Prentice plays, Benson plays, Ja'Cory Brooks and CJ Dippre play. And they've had a couple guys injured. Like Kendrick Law hasn't played a lot this year. He's supposed to come back. Does he play a lot? I don't know. Bama's dicey, man. Let's move on to UCLA, Utah, with a moving spread in favor of Utah, with Cam Rising expected to play. I actually don't have him listed on here, but we'll talk about him in a second. 52.5 total. Again, 6-point spread in favor of Utah. Toughest spot for UCLA by far. Aside from that, was probably Coastal. Dante Moore's the clear starter now. They're not using him as a rusher, which I don't know. I didn't really expect him to be Lamar Jackson out there or anything, but only 3 designed attempts. He's taken 4 sacks. The floor on him is low. The offense is fast, but I think they want to run. One thing I'll say about Moore is he hasn't been pushed yet, so does he live up to the test? Utah's defense has been pretty good. They've shown cracks. They also, for the teams on their schedule, was impressive. They got up in that game immediately, which Florida is not a pass from behind kind of team. They kind of want to run it down your throat, so that was out of the picture for them. They played Baylor on a backup quarterback. So I have questions about Utah's defense. I'm not sure UCLA is the team to exploit it. I'm not going to X Moore out. We'll probably get a couple lineups, but he's not a guy I want to be overexposed to. Just really low floor with him, questionable ceiling. I like his receivers, which is another reason I think he can succeed in some of these matchups. Cal transfer, J. Michael Sturdivant. USC transfer, Kyle Ford are your top 2 guys here. Both are good players. They've got Logan Loya here too as their wide receiver 3, who should be healthy. Contrarian stacks are viable, very, very small portion of the portfolio if you do this. At running back, Carson Steele, he's leading a timeshare that also involves TJ Harden. Anthony Akins, the Army transfers actually played a little bit, but in that first game against Coastal, their most competitive game, it was all Steele, all Harden. 13 carries for Steele, 11 for Harden. They're both too expensive in my opinion. On the Utah side, Cam Rising, he's back apparently. ACL tear in the bowl game. I don't know what his mobility is going to look like. This guy is extremely mobile. He's nearly averaging 6 yards per carry in his career. It's a big part of his game. If you could guarantee me Cam Rising is 100% healthy, I'd be playing him. So I'm going to watch this throughout the week, see what people say. Rising's worth a shot if we get news that he's fully healthy and people aren't going to play him, because the rushing's good and he's the most efficient passer, arguably in the conference outside of Caleb Williams and Bo Nix, maybe Penix too. Like, this is a good conference for quarterbacks. Rising's right up there with those guys. He's extremely valuable to this spread and this offense. He is the engine that makes it go. And they've been able to get by without him, but man, he just adds such a different element through the air. The backfield, Micah Bernard's out for the year, so Jaquindon Jackson has come in. He's shared more than I thought he would with Glover, but in their second most recent game against Baylor, 19 carries, Glover only 7. Glover's just playing a change of pace role. Jaquindon Jackson still a very strong play at 6,100. He's also taken on most of the pass game role with Bernard being out. Bernard was the former pass game option. Utah held out a ton of guys last week in anticipation of this game. So you didn't see Vele, you didn't see Pittman. They should both be back here. Vele is the clear wide receiver 1 in terms of snaps, routes, targets, I guess. He would be ahead of Mikey Matthews if he played last week. So Vele is a little bit expensive for this offense, but he's locked in. Money Parks is the wide receiver 2 in terms of routes. Mikey Matthews continues to ascend. He's their 4-star freshman. I'd like to see that out of them, and I think he offers more juice than a guy like Parks. Not getting enough routes for me just yet, but we'll continue to monitor him maybe for tournaments. And lastly, Brant Keithy's expected to return here too. Thomas Yasmin's been really bad in his place, so Brant Keithy's somewhat interesting. We only have him projected for 40% of the routes. I could see him anywhere between like 25 and 75. He's been out for over a year. So we'll see on Keithy. Monitor his status pregame. Could be worth a flyer. Game of the week, at least for DFS, and I real life maybe too. Colorado, Oregon, 21-point spread in favor of Oregon, but the 70 total is why I call it the game of the week. This is the premier DFS spot. Shedeur Sanders in Colorado, they're playing hyper fast, passing 62.5% of the time. Sanders has not been mobile. He only has 1 designed rush attempt. He has 9 scrambles, but the offensive line's a question. And honestly, the offensive line deserves more credit. Shedeur Sanders has one of the longest times to throw in college football. He's like, the guy is fearless. Props to him. They're running these long, developing, deep routes with an offensive line that's somewhat shaky. So Shedeur is hanging on to the ball forever. He's fearless with it, and he's delivered under pressure. But man, this guy's taking hits. He's taking sacks. It leads to an injury probably at some point this year. But the portion for DFS that really matters is it leads to sacks. He has negative 59 rushing yards. He's strictly gotten there on 300-yard bonuses. Colorado now has a 24.5 implied team total. Just bringing you behind the glass, even with this pace and this pass rate, he projects for around 270-ish yards, 275 if you're generous with the efficiency. Like, Shadeur's going to have a dud one of these games, and he could still have a very good passing game, but man, these sacks are going to hurt him at some point. I do not like Shedeur at his price. I think he's going to be overowned with the Colorado hype. But, I mean, positively, the ceiling is undeniable. The guy's already thrown for over 500 yards, and he's averaging 4.16 as a passer. Dicey fade, but I think I'm going to do it. Backfield is difficult to evaluate. Dylan Edwards has moved ahead. It's still a timeshare. Sevion Wilkerson and Anthony Hankerson have been involved. They're going to get Alton McCaskill back. This seems like it's what they've been holding him out for. Now, does Alton McCaskill come back and handle a feature back workload? I would bet against it, especially with Edwards playing so well, particularly in the pass game. So I think you get these guys cannibalizing each other, and it's a situation where Edwards probably plays a lot as the preferred pass catching back anyway. He has a 56% route share. Receiver, we know exactly what's going to happen at the top. No Travis Hunter. Xavier Weaver and Jimmy Horn both have 95% route rates, locked in target shares. They're 2 of the best receiver plays in the slate, even with some Shedeur concerns. The wide receiver 3 is Tarvarish Dawson, really involved last game. With Dawson, you saw his route rate, pulling it up here. Last game, this jumped all the way to 93%. So Dawson, very good price-adjusted play. They had been running a lot of 4 wide receivers to begin the year. Last week, they used a tight end a lot. Michael Harrison, 68% route rate. You could look at Michael Harrison here too. I have no issues with those top 4 options. Only thing that might throw a wrinkle into Dawson is Javon Antonio is back at practice. What I will say is Dawson's been so good, I don't think it brings him off the field. 4,600 Dawson, completely fine. Oregon, man, this team is locked and loaded here. I think Bo Nix is probably in your cash lineup because it's not a tight slate. He is the best floor ceiling combination out of anyone, I think. The offense hasn't pushed him. His mobility is awesome when they use him that way, but only 3 designed attempts. Last year, man, Bo Nix on design attempts was a nightmare for other teams. His passing efficiency is awesome. His receivers are better, man, like Bo Nix, spot of the year against a horrific Colorado defense without their best player, Travis Hunter. Backfield will be a timeshare. Noah Whittington played as the RB2 over Jordan James in their most recent competitive game against Texas Tech. But Bucky Irving's going to lead this. Bucky Irving, awesome pass catcher here too. 50% route rate, just shy of that. He had 8 targets against Texas Tech. I mean, Bucky Irving's locked into a premier role. And in that game, he had 11 carries, but man, the 8 targets really make up for it. So if he sees 15 touches total, you're probably getting like 5 to 6 of those in the form of targets. You'll take that all day with Bucky Irving. He's a solid play. Receivers, we have 2 locked-in guys. It's Gary Bryant and Troy Franklin. So I'm using that Texas Tech game a lot for Oregon because they played 2 cupcakes outside of it. But in that particular game, you saw the route share for both of these guys way, way up above 90%. So to be specific, as I pull it up, 94% for Troy Franklin, 94% for Gary Bryant Jr. Tez Johnson, 54%. Then we go down. It's not pretty after that. Like Trayshawn Holden's a non-factor, 15% in that game. And I don't think Chris Hudson, who is back, is going to siphon off a lot of this work. He only had 10% of the routes last week. Tight end is a split. It's Ferguson at the top. He had a 58% route share in that game, but Pat Herbert was at 40%. So not enough here. All this to say, I think your top 2 options are very clearly Troy Franklin and Gary Bryant Jr. Gary Bryant's price is really nice at $5K. Cash game viable, I think. Miami Temple, 23.5 point spread in favor of the Hurricanes, 46 total. Not great, but Miami still has a 35 point implied team total. Van Dyke, Miami just showed an absolute willingness to beat down opponents. They did that to Bethune-Cookman. They rushed Van Dyke in that game. He had a touchdown. But man, Van Dyke's been hyper efficient. Miami's slow right now, 128th in pace. They should increase this in more competitive spots. Plus Temple's 10th in pace, so maybe you see more plays than normal for Van Dyke. He doesn't run, which makes him a bit overpriced at 86, but tournaments, stacks, fine there. Team total is high enough. I think we get back Mark Fletcher this week at the running back position, which renders this a 4-way committee between Parrish, Allen, and Chaney. No interest there. Receiver, very clear. Xavier Restrepo, Jacoby George, Colby Young, all 3 are viable. All 3 are too cheap. They're going to dice up this Temple defense. On the Temple side, EJ Warner passes a ton. He's averaging 40 attempts per game, but he doesn't run, and the efficiency's lacking. So he's just shy of sort of the Austin Reed category, the Will Rogers category, where you backdoor your way to a lot of 300-yard games. The attempts are there, but Temple's so bad that the efficiency's not. I'd rather play other cheap signal callers that can run. Plus, EJ Warner does not have a full snap share. Quincy Patterson, you see him pop up here. 8 designed rush attempts. They've used him in every game this year. It's only a handful of snaps, but that matters. He's on the field for a handful of snaps, which limits EJ Warner. Backfield's a 4-way committee, and they're huge underdogs. I don't want any part of this. Receiver, you could look to some very cheap targets. Dante Wright's a legitimate player, 4.4K. He has 27 targets and 189 yards this year, plays every snap. Zay Baines, 3,300. He has a 95% route rate, 18 targets. That's 6.3 targets per game. Talk about really cheap guys on the field a lot. Zay Baines is one of them. He's playing ahead of Ahmad Anderson right now. David Martin Robinson's the tight end. He splits time a little bit, so I don't have as much interest there. Man, really cheap price on Zay Baines. Maryland taking on Michigan State. I believe this closes out this. No, it doesn't. I lied. We have 4 more games. Just kidding. Maryland, 7.5 point favorite, 52 total here. Playing Michigan State. Not the best game environment here, but Michigan State has shown no resistance on defense. They just got absolutely clobbered by Penix, and they're allowing nearly 10 yards per pass attempt. They're now facing Tagovailoa. Tough scene here. Tagovailoa is not mobile. He has 0 designed rush attempts on the year, but I would call his mobility functional. He's not taking a lot of sacks, and he scrambles a decent amount away from pressure. So the floor is close to 0, but it's not negative usually. The ceiling is monstrous. 2 years ago, he averaged 295 passing yards per game. Last year, he was closer to 250. But, I mean, he's live for 300-yard bonuses at any point. I like Tagovailoa for tournaments. He's easy to stack, too. Jayshon Jones is the 1. I view Caden Prather as the 2 and Ty Felton as the 3. There's been a little noise there because of injuries. Tyrese Chambers returned last game, but only about 30% of the routes. Maybe he siphons off some routes here, but I think it's pretty clear pecking order: Jones, Prather, and Ty Felton. From there, Corey Dykes at tight end has been pretty involved. He's averaging 65 yards per game. His route share is good. It's 55%. It's not quite as good as some other tight ends, and I think he's a bit overpriced, but he's worth mentioning. Backfield, second most recent game was more competitive for Maryland. Roman Hemby had 19 carries in that game. He's the player I think you look to if you're playing a running back. What I will say about Hemby is he's a little overpriced at $7,900, especially for a guy who will give up some carries to Antwain Littleton and Colby McDonald. Michigan State, Noah Kim's at risk of getting benched at any point. I'm not playing a Michigan State signal caller. They don't have Jalen Berger here, and they have force-fed Nate Carter 54 carries despite getting clobbered. He also is very active in the pass game. More so in terms of routes. It's only led to 6 targets this year, but Nate Carter is on the field a ton. And I think if they decide to throw more at the running back position, his 49.5% route rate, it should rise here with Berger no longer in the picture. Receiver, it's pretty clearly Trey Mosley, Jerron Glover, and Monterey Foster's your top 3, but it's not that clear. They will rotate Christian Fitzpatrick, some of the other cheaper receivers, Antonio Gates. They get on the field here and there, so it's not clean cut. I think if you're playing one of these guys, it's probably Glover at 3.3K. He has a 64% route share this year, 7 targets in their last game. He's cheap enough to look to in tournaments. And then Malik Carr at tight end. Worth mentioning here, they rotate tight end a fair amount. Jalen Franklin and Tyneil Hopper both play, so I would rather play Glover than Carr straight up, but 2 more cheap guys you can rotate in and out of lineups. We get to Boston College, Louisville, 55.5 total, 14-point spread in favor of Louisville. Boston College signal caller Tom Castellanos is the guy I want to talk about. I think he's the best cheap quarterback that runs. He had 12 designed attempts 2 weeks ago, 11 designed attempts last week. He has 231 yards, and that's basically just in 2 games because he barely played in week 1. Emmett Morehead's benched. Tom Castellanos has been decent as a passer. I think you can get to him. Louisville's pass defense also 9.3 yards per attempt allowed. Out of the cheap running quarterbacks, that's like Fancher and those guys, Thomas Castellanos is my favorite. Backfield, Pat Garwo has not been updated. He led the backfield in carries week 1, got hurt in week 2, and then we don't know for this week. If he plays, it should be a 50-50 timeshare between him and Western Kentucky transfer Kai Robichaud. Without him, Robichaud has carried 19 and 21 times. Boston College is at 52% pass rate on the season. I think this is an egregious mistake. Like books right now, Prize Picks, this is a thing you can capitalize on. They dropped their pass rate significantly last week, and the box score looks close against Florida State, but they were down 21 points at half. Negative game script didn't matter. Ran the ball a ton last week. Love Castellanos. Robichaud is interesting for tournaments if we do not get Garwo. The receiving game is pretty condensed, so I actually don't hate playing these guys. It's basically Lewis Bond, Ryan O'Keefe, and Joseph Griffin. Target share is condensed enough where I think you could contrarian stack Castellanos. For tournaments, he's not going to be stacked a lot. I envision a lot of people likely using him as a dual threat naked quarterback. You throw in Bond or O'Keefe or Griffin, you're probably siphoning off some ownership. Not to mention George Takix at 3.4K. He has a 74% route share too. On the Louisville side, clear upside with Plummer. He's not much of a runner. He actually has 12 designed attempts this year, which maybe is just a deviation from his Cal days. He was like a negative rusher there, but I mean, that's pretty decent designed work. That's like better than Jalen Milroe, which is, never thought I'd be saying that. Anyway, this is a Braum offense. Like when the going gets tough in Louisville, they haven't been in the most competitive games this year. Last week was surprisingly competitive against Indiana, but prior to that, Murray State. I mean, when this gets tough, Braum and Purdue that was a fast offense, a pass-friendly offense. Plummer is a pocket passer by trade, and the design attempts are solid for the floor, but I think the passing ceiling is way higher here than we're anticipating. I'm going to use him in stacks, contrarian stacks. And one way to play like Jamari Thrash might be to just throw Plummer on there, because Thrash is going to be extremely owned at 6.6K. The guy's just a walking big plays, averaging 110 yards per game. He has a 25% target share. So while the 21 raw targets doesn't look good, if you think Louisville throws more, which I do, Thrash is still a very good play here. They're rotating wide receivers 2 through 4. Jimmy Callaway, Amari Huggins-Bruce, Kevin Coleman, even Chris Bell's getting on the field a little bit. Not a ton of interest in those guys beyond Thrash. I'm going to try to find the salary if I can. Backfield had been a three-way committee. They consolidated this against Indiana. Jawar Jordan, 18 carries. Jawar Jordan, 3 targets. Dominated routes. He's too cheap at 6,500. BYU, Kansas, 55 total, 9.5 point spread. Interesting game. Sort of tempted to bet BYU after the Arkansas win. Like, how much do we really think Kansas, do we really think they're nearly 10 points better? I don't know. Slovis, we know his game. He doesn't run. He has to get there passing. He has 30 attempts per game, 220 yards. I think books are too low on his passing prop, but I still don't think he has a 300-yard ceiling often in this game environment. Kansas is slow. Their defense has been pretty good. Bit of a surprise, but I think Slovis more times than not probably comes in somewhere between 220, 250 passing yards, loses out on the bonus, and maybe takes a couple sacks, bringing you down point-wise. The backfield, Aiden Robbins is still questionable here. He allegedly is dealing with a nagging injury, so they haven't been playing him a lot. LJ Martin, 22 carries last game. You're not getting great reporting out of BYU, so I would watch this team pregame, but if we get no news on like Martin or Robbins here, fire up LJ Martin, 4.9K. I mean, 22 carries. He's the most active in the pass game, 43% of routes. It's a pretty no-brainer play here as long as he's fully healthy. Receiver, okay, so they had some injuries to start the year. I'm going to try to decipher this route tree for you just over the last couple games as I pull up BYU. The most consistent guy has been tight end Isaac Rex, 88% of routes, 94%, 94%. Then you go to Chase Roberts, 97%, 72%, 48 against Arkansas. We'll talk about maybe why that was. I still think Chase Roberts is a top 3 receiver on this team. From there, I think Keanu Hill is probably a top 3 receiver, 75% and 68% last 2 games. Then you bring back Cody Epps, 42% last game, first game back. I think this rises. So right away, I'm going to bank on your 3 receivers being Chase Roberts, Keanu Hill, and Cody Epps. And I kind of think Keanu Hill's your number 1. From there, you will see Darius Lassiter and Keelan Marion involved. Last game, Chase Roberts, 48% of routes, Keelan Marion, 32%. So somewhat difficult to decipher. You just don't have clarity, and you don't have a guy locked into a role. So to sum this all up, if I'm throwing a dart on a BYU wide receiver, my preference is Keanu Hill. Second, I would look to Apps at 4,500. Just think there's room for growth. Third would be Roberts, and I know that's not intuitive. You see Roberts lead the team in targets among receivers. That might be the most likely here. But one thing I'll just say about Rex, he's not affected by this receiver rotation. He's the tight end. He plays every single snap. So maybe Rex is just the safest. For Kansas, Jalen Daniels, 8,400. We've not seen the rushing upside with him. Couple of cupcakes. I mean, Jalen Daniels has elite mobility. At what point do they unleash him on the ground? He has 10 and 3 design attempts over 2 games. At some point, Jalen Daniels is going to nuke a slate with his running. Hyper-efficient passer here, too. This Kansas offense is slow and run-heavy, and they like to run through Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw, but Daniels, with his involvement in the run game, is going to bury a slate at one point in time. Running back Devin Neal's a little banged up, but he leads a committee. 17 carries for him in their last game. He's averaging 16.3 touches per game. He's the preferred pass-catching back, 51% route share. Highshaw's a change of pace. The price difference isn't enough for me to want to play around with Highshaw. I'm finding the salary to get to Neal, and I'll be heavy on Neal. His price is too cheap. He's going to see 17 to 20 touches in competitive games. Receiver, very clear. Quentin Skinner, Lawrence Arnold, Luke Grimm. You're getting a discount on Luke Grimm because he's been banged up. Watch him pregame. As long as he's out there, He should be the 1A or 1B. I'm not confident. It's between him and Arnold. Skinner, I think, is getting a little bump just because of the grim injury. Tight end, Mason Fairchild's 4,400, 80% route rate. Live as a punt. Last game here, pretty good game. Texas Tech, West Virginia. 55 total, 6-point spread in favor of Texas Tech. Tyler Shugg, man, this guy runs a ton. 21% designed run, or 21 designed runs. First 2 games, 7 designed runs against Oregon, he had 13. Really good rushing floor. This is the Zach Kitley air raid. This team is 3rd in pace. Their pass rate is 59%. The floor on Shugg is awesome. So I think there's 3 guys you're mainly considering for cash. It's Shugg, it's Nix, and it's one of the cheap guys. My preference is Castellanos. Depending on your build, I'm comfortable with any of those guys. Backfield, Cameron Valdez is expected back, so maybe you don't see the full Taj Brooks show. And last week he had 20 touches. So I think he's still live. He probably leads this backfield, but I don't know. How much does Valdez play? First game, he had 12 carries, Brooks, 6 Valdez. There is some downside there, but Brooks is still a pretty good play. Receiver, your top 2 guys are Jaron Bradley, Miles Price. There's not really much really siphoning off from those guys. The receiver kind of starts after them, if that makes sense. So once you get beyond those guys, then I think there's serious questions at receiver. Those top 2 are completely fine, in my opinion. Most recently, you saw Jordan Brown play quite a bit. He'll work with Xavier White and Dre McCray and Louis Fungi, JJ Sparkman. We saw Nehemiah Martinez return. I'm just going to lock in Bradley and Price for the most part and not worry about anyone else. They don't use a tight end on every play. Mason Tharp's route rate, it's around 50%, so not too much interest there. West Virginia, Garrett Green's a game-time decision. What I like about West Virginia is they're super run-heavy, and they didn't change their offense when Nico Marchiol, I think is how you say that. Sorry, Nico. Nico Marchiol is what I'm going to go with for now. Anyway, he came right in and had 9 design rush attempts when Garrett Green went out. Same offense, didn't matter, remain run heavy. So if Garrett Green sits, we know what we're getting in Nico Marchiol. He is a 6,100 quarterback playing in this offense, which is extremely run heavy. He's 200 more or 300 more than Castellanos. Excuse me, I forget the price in Castellanos. It's either 59 or 5,800. GPPs, I'm going to run some Nico Marchiol, I don't know how to say his name. The backfield's super run heavy, but more 50-50 split last week. CJ Donaldson, 18 carries, Jalen Anderson, 19. Donaldson was a little banged up, so that's worth mentioning. I think he still leads the committee when he's fully healthy and hasn't had his status updated, but nobody seems really concerned about it. I think he's completely fine. He's averaging 16.3 touches per game. He's live for 20-plus carries here. Receivers really dicey with this team, man. They just don't throw the ball enough. I think Cole Taylor, the tight end, is your safest guy here. That's not saying a ton. I don't have a lot of interest. Plus, you're rotating guys like Jayshon Polk didn't play last week. EJ Horton hasn't played in a little bit. Some of these guys are practicing and expected to return. What does that do to like Devin Carter, Hudson Clement, Preston Fox? I don't know. I'm off West Virginia's pass catchers. I'll just be focusing on the quarterback situation and the running backs. All right, we had some feedback, and I am ready for this today. We're going to go top 3 at each position. I'm going to go price adjusted, so this is mainly for like cash games. But anyway, you guys probably know where I'm going at quarterback. In no particular order, my top 3 are Tom Castellanos, Bo Nix, and Tyler Shugg. Sorry, how could I forget Tyler Shugg? Those would be the top 3 for me. Explained a lot of that previously. I think if you're going beyond that, 4 and 5 would be Chandler Morris. I'm just going to stop with Morris. My running backs, scroll down to the list I made. So some of this is injury dependent, but I think right away, LJ Martin, if you get him healthy, Aiden Robbins out, he should be near the top of your list. Jawar Jordan as favorites in that game with the recent role he took, and Rasheen Ali. Playing Virginia Tech, they're slight favorites, volatile game, but those are all 3 guys I'm pretty comfortable with in the mid-price range. And then going down to receiver, top 3 for me at this point. I'm kind of go a couple different ways with this. For studs at the top, Troy Franklin, Evan Stewart are very good options. And then I want one of the Colorado receivers among my studs. For cheap guys, I think you have a lot of options. Zay Baines for Temple, that's an extremely pass-heavy offense. They are 10th in pace. That's somewhere you could go. Mid-price, Andrew Anthony at 5,300 really piques my attention for Oklahoma. He's extremely underpriced in this matchup. So I kind of tried to give you some options at each of the price range. That's 5 guys at receiver I'd be focusing my attention on. But let me know in the comment section if there's someone you really prefer. Reach out to me on Twitter if you have a question. I'm at Matt_Gajewski. Otherwise, we'll be back for Live Before Lock on Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Good luck, everybody. We'll see you guys then. Until next time, have a good one.